Marbles is a really powerful module for creating generative music. It can create all of your triggers and modulation sources, as well as pitch information for your entire patch. So it's a difficult module to get to grips with, but once you learn it, it can really be the brain of your entire patch. And so that's why I've spent a few weeks now reading the manual, practicing with marbles, and now I want to go into how I use it in my patches. Okay, so the first thing I want to go over here is the basic functionality of marbles and what makes it so versatile. It has two basic sections. You have the T section, the X section, and they work together to create the triggers and the modulation for your entire patch or for whatever you want. The T section is all based around triggers. It can be externally clocked, or you can change the timing based on this rate knob. And at 12 o'clock, that is apparently supposed to be 120 BPM. If you externally clock it, though, it will override the rate knob, and yeah, for all intents and purposes, that looks to be about the same, so I guess that is about 120 BPM. And now if we move this, it won't do anything because it's being overridden by the external clock. In this first green mode, T2 becomes the master clock output, and then a coin toss is done to decide whether T1 or T3 will trigger at the same time. It will always be one of them, and that probability is equal while this bias knob is in the middle. But if we set the bias all the way to the left, T1 will trigger 100% of the time. And if it goes all the way to the right, T3 will trigger 100% of the time. And this is something you can modulate to vary that probability between them. Jitter here sort of randomizes the pattern. And you can see that already starting to happen on T2. A little bit of jitter is meant to just humanize the pattern, and then if you go all the way with jitter, it creates total randomness. This rate button will change the relationship between T2 and the clock. So in this orange mode, you can see it says ×1, and so it's a 1-to-1 relationship. If you go into red mode, it's a 4-to-1 relationship where T2 is triggering 4 times as often as the clock. And then in this top green mode, it says 4, but it looks to me like a 2-to-1 relationship where every 2 pulses of the clock is 1 pulse of T2. Go back to 1-to-1. In the second mode, the orange mode, T1 and T3 have a more exponential relationship with T2. So it's not just a coin toss anymore to see who's going to trigger at the same time as T2. They actually all trigger at the same time until you change the bias. And so turning it towards the left will favor T1 in this sort of exponential relationship where now T1 is triggering way more often. And then the same thing, if we move it over towards T3, now T3 will trigger way more often. And so to get a really, really randomized pattern, that can be fun if you have something modulating this back and forth quite a bit. And then the last mode, the red mode, is meant to be like a drum machine where T2 would be doing the hi-hats, T1 would be the kick, and then T3 would be the snare. So this is sort of triggering, we'll say on 8th notes, like a hi-hat would be doing, and then that's the 1, that's the 3. And so it's kind of just a traditional kick snare pattern. I don't remember what the bias does in this circumstance, but I think it might just change the style of kick and snare relationships. Yeah, it's just changing the relationship between T1 and T3 to be different kick and snare patterns. So the red mode's basically supposed to be a drum machine. Okay, so that was the T section. Now we have the X section, and this section is all about modulation. So these are 4 independent modulation sources that are all clocked off of the T section. I'm not sure if Y is clocked off the T section or if it's just completely independent. I'm still definitely not an expert at this module, especially once you read the manual and you can see all of the extra menus and extra things you can do with it. It's hard to remember all of them, but I've got the basic functionality down. So when you turn the spread knob towards the left, it will decrease the range of the pitches to the more towards the center of what's available. So if you were to think of really low pitches and really high pitches and the entire range of that, as you move the spread knob towards the left, it will slowly start moving towards only those center pitches. But this is true for any, it's just the CV it's outputting. So whether you're using it for pitch or not, it will move more and more towards the center of that CV range until you get all the way to the left here, and everything will just output a single output that's sort of right in the middle of the range. So now with the spread moved all the way to the left, only the very, very central voltage is available, and so it's not randomizing anymore because it only has one voltage available to it. And as we move back to the 12 o'clock position, it's widening back out into the middle sort of section of voltage that it will create a random voltage from. And then when you get to about 2 o'clock on the knob, it'll create a random voltage based on the entire spectrum of voltage that it has available to it. And then past 2 o'clock, the more extreme voltages become more likely. So again, if this were pitch, it would be very, very high notes and very, very low notes would be more probable. And those central notes would be less likely to happen as you get farther and farther towards the far right of the spectrum here. And then on the X side, the bias actually biases towards choosing lower pitches or higher pitches, or again, lower voltages and higher voltages. It's not shifting the entire voltage range. It's just in the same way that this was biasing the coin toss decision, this is biasing the decision towards a higher pitch or a higher voltage, or a lower pitch or a lower voltage. And then in the middle, the probability is even. Step speaks to the smoothness of the voltage that's output, so you can see it really clearly here. It just smooths right out when you put it all the way to the right side, and then all the way to the left side, it becomes completely stepped. In the middle, it's kind of a smooth step, although I'd still say that's more stepped than smooth. So for X's 3 modes, in the green mode, everything works as expected. You can see this side of steps is more smooth, that side's more stepped, and it acts, sort of in accordance with that. That biases towards low, that biases towards high. It's kind of what you expect is what it does. In the orange mode, X2 does what it's supposed to do, but X1 and X3 does the opposite. So if we move all the way towards the smooth side here, X2, which is this one, will be very smooth. But then X1 and X3, which are these two down here, end up being really stepped because they're doing the opposite of what they were supposed to do. If I bias this towards the higher pitches, X2 will bias towards higher pitches, but X1 and 3 will actually go the other way, as if the knob was turned over here and they're biasing towards lower pitches. Spread, if I move this over here to where it's got the full range, X2 expects that, X1 and 3 are more like are acting as if the knob was turned over here, and so they're not getting the full range. So that's kind of interesting for creating variation between them. And then in the red mode, X3 acts as it's supposed to. So X3 has a smooth output right now. It's biased towards higher pitches. X1 is acting the opposite, so it is completely stepped and it's biased towards lower pitches. And then X2 is acting as if all knobs are turned to 12 o'clock no matter what you do. So I can turn this here, you know, whatever I do, X2 will always act as if all of the knobs are turned to 12 o'clock. And then these two will be opposites of each other. And Y still out there doing its own thing. I don't understand why that well. I don't know if it is just random. I'll have to read the module, or the module. I'll have to read the manual again. I have read it so many times. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to get into is déjà vu. And to understand déjà vu, I think you have to know that random sampler, or marbles, is always creating a new, almost buffer of random voltages that is constantly updating. And when you put it in déjà vu, it starts to basically loop the random voltages that it's already selected. And you can create a length from 1 to 16 steps for those random voltages. So with the T section on déjà vu and déjà vu at 12 o'clock, it will loop the same rhythm and the same selection of who won the coin toss because we're in green mode. It's just going to loop the last 16 steps over and over again. And then for X mode, the voltages that it output, so if we were thinking in terms of pitch, it would output the same 16 notes over and over and over again. So with déjà vu at 12 o'clock, it is completely looping the same 16 steps over and over again, which could be really useful. But if we turn it towards the left, it's going to start actually creating 16 new steps of totally random voltages. And so with déjà vu turned all the way to the left, we're actually still getting random voltages. But as we turn it towards noon, we're getting a sort of balance between random steps and looped steps. So at about 11 o'clock, it's in that 16-step loop, but one of those steps will be replaced every now and then with a new random voltage. It's kind of just randomizing a loop in a way that is very much the same, but sort of updating it little by little. And then if you go beyond 12 o'clock, it doesn't introduce any new random voltages, but what it'll do is it will start to introduce randomization in which of those voltages it plays. So again, especially in terms of pitch, it'll take the same 16 notes and just decide to play them in a slightly different order. And if you turn it all the way to the right, it will completely randomize the order that those 16 notes are played back in. So it will never change the notes. That is still set, but the order that they're played in would be totally random. And then same with the triggers. Which triggers will stay the same, but the order at which they're played will be random. I hope that makes sense. You can also have just one of these turned on if you wanted. So now the triggers are stuck in a 16-bar loop, a 16-step loop, but the modulation side will still be totally randomized. Or you could have it the other way, where the modulation side is going to be looped in a 16-step loop, but the triggers will still be totally randomized. And so that can be another way to introduce some randomization, but also have something consistent. The last thing I wanted to go into before we make a patch is just how great Marbles is at self-patching. Being able to use these modulation sources to modulate things like the bias. So now without even introducing another module, we have the bias being modulated and it's affecting the T1 and T3 triggers. Modulate the jitter, and that's going to create a lot of randomness. It's not really possible to attenuate these signals, so if you wanted to, you could use a VCA with it to just add a little bit of modulation to something like the jitter, or if you want to just go for it, that's cool too. Okay, now that we've gone over the functionality of Marbles, I'm going to go ahead and make a simple generative ambient kind of patch with it. And I want to do that in orange mode because if I go and put these in the scope, X2 is really smooth, X3 is really stepped, X2 is going to be biasing towards the center of the range as far as pitches go, And then X3 is going to be biasing towards the extremes, as if the knob was turned all the way over here to more like the 3 o'clock position. And also the bias is set this way, so X2 is going to be biased towards the lower range of notes, which means X3 will be biased towards the higher range of notes. And so having these opposites means that they'll be outputting 2 very different melodies. And also X2 will be more likely to have a bit of a glide between those notes. I also want to have T in orange mode. I want to bias them. Maybe I'll try with X1. Do some different colors. And what does that give us notes wise? So right now it seems like there would be a lot more higher pitches being played because these are going to be the higher pitches. And these should be biased more towards lower pitches. Okay, that'll work. And I'll move the length up to like 8. Maybe I'll do the full 16. Just in case I turn Deja Vu on for something. I think instead of having just the full range going into the quantizers, I want to go from, keep the colors the same, from X2 and X3 into a sample and hold, and then have T1 and T3 triggering that sample and hold. And I'll use that going into the 2 oscillators. Okay, so I'm going to have this one doing the more mid-range notes, and then this one will be doing the more high-range notes. Send those to a VCA. And use T1, this pink color, and T3, oh no, to trigger envelopes or gates. There. Okay, so now T1 and T3 are selecting the notes and also triggering the envelopes. It's really loud. At least I think it's really loud. Might just be my headphones. Oh, I didn't put them through a filter. So focused on other things. Okay. Definitely want a filter. Okay. Wow. For this mode, I might even want to move this down to the green where it'll fire less often. Okay. Now I'm modulating the bias here, but what else do I want to modulate? I might put Deja Vu on. Maybe for the notes. And move it into this range where it's basically looped, but it'll be introducing a little bit of randomness. You can also modulate Deja Vu, so it would go from full randomness to full, I guess fully looped and then randomly selecting within the loop. So maybe I'll try doing that. I don't know, I'm changing the color. And I'll add jitter too, because that's fun. If I modulate the spread, that'll change which one's going to be playing higher and which one's going to be playing lower notes. I think that could be cool. And then it can be used to modulate other things too. It's not just for modulating itself. Just kind of picking things at random a little bit. Trying some different things here, and it's funny because the X side is modulating the T side. So me changing how the X side is behaving is actually also changing how the T side's behaving. And yeah, it's pretty interesting how they become dependent on each other, and so changing one small thing can actually change the whole patch. It's a little more plucky. Finding these swings really extreme, so I might actually take this X1 that's modulating the bias, bring it down a little bit in this VCA, and then go back to the bias. There, that creates a little bit of interest in the pattern without it being a little too disruptive for this more ambient kind of style. Okay, that's a pretty quick and simple patch, but I think it really goes over the functionality of marbles. I really like this module for creating these sorts of patches and for creating randomness in general. I'm still exploring it, but I hope that you found something useful out of this. I hope it was interesting, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!